Welcome to Mystery Unlocked, where every story unlocks a new mystery waiting to be unraveled. Grab your favorite cup of coffee, settle in, and prepare to dive into a world full of twists, turns, and unexpected secrets. Stay curious and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let the adventure begin. Chapter 1. A Wedding to Remember. Quite the event, wouldn't you say, Miss Marple? Murmured Colonel Whitaker, swirling the brandy in his glass. Langley weddings have always been grand affairs. Miss Marple, seated comfortably in the drawing room of Langley Manor, merely nodded, her keen blue eyes observing the festivities. Through the open doorway, the reception was still in full swing, though the bride, Eleanor Langley, now Eleanor Langley, in a somewhat absurd doubling of names, had excused herself early. Victor Langley, the groom, was at the center of attention, charming guests with easy smiles and good-natured quips. Yet Miss Marple had noticed something peculiar. Earlier, Eleanor had looked troubled during the wedding vows, her fingers tightening around the bouquet just a fraction too long. She didn't seem particularly radiant for a bride, Miss Marple commented lightly, taking a sip of tea. One would expect a little more joy on such an occasion. Colonel Whitaker scoffed. Nerves, no doubt. Marriage is a serious business. Miss Marple made no reply, but she did observe that Harriet Redfern, a guest standing near the piano, had been watching Victor intently all evening. Harriet was well dressed, poised, and yet there was something restless in the way she held her glass, fingers tightening around the stem. At that moment, Lord Bertram Langley entered, his booming voice cutting through the music. Splendid evening, another Langley properly wed at last. His joviality, however, seemed forced. Miss Marple's fingers hovered over her saucer. Properly wed, not happily. Later that evening, Miss Marple took a short stroll through the corridors of Langley Manor. It was a habit of hers observing people when they thought no one was looking. From an open doorway, she glimpsed Harriet Redfern speaking in hushed tones with Eleanor near the staircase. "Eleanor, listen to me," Harriet was saying urgently. "You don't have to go through with it. There are ways it's done." "Harriet," Eleanor interrupted, her voice tight. "There's no going back now." Miss Marple moved along before she was noticed, her mind quietly filing away the exchange. It was an odd thing for a woman to say on her wedding night. By midnight, most of the guests had retired. Victor remained downstairs, sharing drinks with Lord Bertram and a few lingering gentlemen. Eleanor, however, was nowhere to be seen. Miss Marple, ready to retire herself, passed by the bridal suite and hesitated. The door was slightly ajar. A draught stirred the lace curtains. There was no sound from within. Gently, she nudged the door open an inch further. The bed was untouched. Eleanor's wedding gown lay neatly folded over a chair. On the dressing table, her jewelry box sat unopened, its contents untouched. Miss Marple frowned. It was most unusual. A bride might leave a party early, but it was unlikely she would fail to prepare for bed. Even more unlikely that she would leave her wedding jewels behind. A faint scuff mark near the side door caught her attention. A heavy boot, perhaps, or something dragged. The door led to a lesser-used stairwell, descending toward the back gardens. Miss Marple's fingers tightened around the door handle. Something was very wrong, and Eleanor Langley was nowhere to be found. Chapter 2. The vanished Bridie. A loud knock echoed through Langley Manor at the break of dawn. The sharp rap of knuckles against wood startled the house awake. The butler, looking disheveled, hurried to answer, only to find Victor Langley standing at the threshold of the master suite, his face pale and drawn. "She's gone," Victor announced, his voice hoarse. The household stirred with confusion. Maids exchanged glances. The morning staff hesitated in their tasks, and before long, a murmur ran through the corridors. The bride was missing. Miss Marple, having risen early, paused in the hallway outside her guest room. A missing bride was not something one encountered every day, even in St. Mary Mead. The drawing room quickly filled with the principal members of the household. Lord Bertram Langley sat in an armchair, his expression unreadable, while Harriet Redfern stood near the window, her arms crossed. The vicar, Reverend Graves, had arrived, looking troubled. "I woke early," Victor explained, running a hand through his tousled hair. "I thought Eleanor was still asleep, but the bed was untouched. She never came back last night. Perhaps she took an early walk," suggested Colonel Whitaker, though the doubt in his voice was evident. "She wouldn't have left without her things," Miss Marple interjected, her hands neatly folded in her lap. "Her travel case, her jewelry, they're all still in the suite." Victor shot her a glance but did not reply immediately. Instead, he turned to Inspector James Wycliffe, who had been summoned to the estate. The inspector, a man of solid build with a no-nonsense demeanor, was already shaking his head. "This sort of thing happens more often than one might think," Wycliffe said briskly. "Cold feet, second thoughts. A woman about to enter a lifetime commitment sometimes panics." "She would not have panicked," Victor said stiffly. "She was a practical woman. If she had changed her mind, she would have told me to my face. Or left a note," Miss Marple murmured. "Exactly," Victor said. "But there's nothing. No letter, no indication of where she might have gone." Inspector Wycliffe sighed, clearly unimpressed by the notion of foul play. "She had means, did she not? A woman with independent wealth can leave if she wishes. Could she have taken a carriage or no? Carriages left Langley Manor last night," Lord Bertram interrupted, "and the gates were locked." "Not impossible for someone to leave on foot," Wycliffe pointed out. Miss Marple observed Victor carefully. His agitation seemed genuine, but there was something overly controlled about his demeanor. She had encountered men in distress before, and true grief often manifested in confusion, in an inability to form coherent thoughts. Victor, on the other hand, was composed. Too composed. "I don't see why this requires an investigation at all," Lord Bertram muttered. "If Eleanor decided to leave, it's a private matter, not a police one." Harriet, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. "She wouldn't have left without telling me." All eyes turned to her. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the young woman's face. Harriet was tense, her fingers gripping the edge of the windowsill. "Why do you say that, my dear?" Miss Marple asked gently. Harriet hesitated, then lifted her chin. "Because we spoke last night, just before she retired. She would have confided in me if she was planning to leave." Inspector Wycliffe scribbled something in his notebook. "What did you speak about?" Harriet hesitated. "Just personal matters." The inspector frowned. Did she seem troubled? Harriet glanced at Victor before answering. She was thoughtful. Miss Marple tucked that word away. Thoughtful. An interesting choice. By midday, the search had expanded. Servants scoured the gardens. The vicar walked the church grounds, and a few men rode out to check the surrounding countryside. There was no sign of Eleanor. Then, a housemaid approached Miss Marple in hushed tones. "There's something you should see, ma'am," she whispered, glancing around before beckoning Miss Marple toward the side garden. Miss Marple followed the girl through the hedges until they reached a narrow pathway leading to a lesser-used door at the back of the manor. The door was slightly ajar. "This door is usually locked at night," the maid murmured, "but this morning it was open." And there she pointed to the ground. Miss Marple leaned forward, her sharp eyes catching the faintest sign of disturbance. In the damp earth, a scuff mark, partially obscured by morning dew. The mark was not deep, but it suggested something or someone had been dragged. She straightened and turned back to the house, her mind quietly assembling possibilities. If Eleanor had indeed left the manor, she had not done so willingly. The evening, Miss Marple found herself in the small study where Victor had taken refuge. He was seated in a hubocked chair, a glass of brandy in one hand. The room smelled faintly of smoke and liquor. "Quite the ordeal," Miss Marple said conversationally as she settled into the chair opposite him. Victor exhaled sharply. "You have no idea." Miss Marple studied him for a moment. "You loved her, then?" Victor glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Of course I did." Miss Marple nodded. "Love is a peculiar thing, Mr. Langley. It reveals itself in different ways. For some, it is shown in tenderness. For others, in possession." Victor stiffened slightly. "What exactly are you implying?" Miss Marple smiled. "A gentle, think. Oh, nothing at all. Just a thought." Victor took a sip of his drink. "Eleanor wouldn't have left me, and yet she is gone," Miss Marple replied softly. For the first time, Victor hesitated. Just the briefest flicker of something behind his eyes, doubt, fear, guilt, it was hard to say. But Miss Marple had spent a lifetime reading people, and she recognized when a man was holding something back. She rose to leave, but as she reached the door, she paused. "One last thing, Mr. Langley." Victor looked up. "Where were you last night, after Eleanor retired?" Victor frowned. "I was downstairs with the guests." "You saw me?" "Yes," Miss Marple said thoughtfully. "But afterward?" Victor hesitated. "I went for a walk. I needed air." Miss Marple nodded as if satisfied, but as she stepped into the corridor, her expression darkened. "A late-night walk, near the side gardens. near the scuff marks. Coincidence? Or something far more sinister? Before we continue, we'd love to know where you're watching us from. Drop your city and country in the comments. Bellow Chapter 3. Secrets Beneath the Surface. Morning mist clung to the hedgerows as the search for Eleanor Langley resumed. The estate grounds had been combed over twice, yet there was still no sign of the missing bride. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. Miss Marple, however, knew better. People did not simply disappear. There was always a trace, however faint, left behind. She stood near the side entrance where the scuff marks had been found the day before. The faint imprint of a shoe was still visible in the damp soil. Not deep enough for a struggle, but unmistakably a mark of movement. Someone had passed this way, in the dead of night, lost in thought. Miss Marple. She turned to see Harriet Redfern approaching, her gloved hands clasped tightly in front of her. There was a guarded look about the young woman today, a certain wariness that had not been present before. I often find that thoughts are best sorted in the quiet hours. Miss Marple replied kindly. Harriet hesitated before stepping closer. They think she ran away, don't they? Miss Marple studied her carefully. And what do you think? Harriet's gaze dropped momentarily. Eleanor wasn't the sort to run. If she wanted to leave, she would have done it before the wedding, not after. Miss Marple noted the firm conviction in her voice. Harriet knew something, or at the very least, suspected it. You and Eleanor were quite close, weren't you? Miss Marple said, her tone conversational. Harriet tensed slightly. We were friends, yes, but I rather think it was more than that. Harriet's eyes flashed with something defensiveness perhaps, or something deeper. What are you implying, Miss Marple? Miss Marple smiled gently. Oh, nothing at all, my dear. Only that friends confide in each other. And I wonder if Eleanor confided in you. Harriet hesitated before exhaling. We spoke the night of the wedding. Yes, I overheard, Miss Marple admitted. She said, it's done. There's no going back now. What did she mean by that? Harriet flinched at the reminder. She wasn't happy about the marriage, but she wouldn't have just disappeared. Miss Marple nodded. Then the question is, what happened after she left you? Harriet looked troubled. I don't know. She was supposed to retire for the night. I never saw her again. Miss Marple studied her carefully, then changed the subject. Tell me, my dear, do you trust Victor? Harriet's expression darkened. Victor is charming. He knows how to say the right things. But trust, no, I don't trust him at all. That, Miss Marple thought, was most interesting indeed. Later that day, Inspector Wycliffe gathered the household in the drawing room. He had, reluctantly, agreed that Eleanor's disappearance was suspicious, though he was still unconvinced that foul play was involved. I will need to question each of you properly, he announced, starting with Mr. Langley. Victor, seated in a leather armchair, looked composed but weary. I've already answered all your questions. Then you won't mind answering them again. Miss Marple watched carefully as the inspector began his questioning. What time did you last see your wife? Victor sighed. Around 10, just before she retired. She said she had a headache and wanted to rest. And after that, I stayed with the guests for a while, then took a walk in the gardens, alone. Victor hesitated. Yes, Miss Marple noticed the pause. A slight hesitation, barely a second, but telling nonetheless. And what did you do after your walk? I went to bed. You heard nothing? No sounds in the night? Victor shook his head. Nothing unusual. Inspector Wycliffe nodded. Very well. And tell me, Mr. Langley, were you aware that your wife was unhappy? Victor's jaw tightened. That's nonsense. Eleanor knew what she was getting into. This marriage was as much an arrangement as it was about affection. Miss Marple caught the flicker in Harriet's expression. The young woman was clearly restraining herself from speaking. Wycliffe turned to Lord Bertram. And you, sir, when did you last see Eleanor? Lord Bertram's face was unreadable. At the reception, same as everyone else. Did you speak to her directly? A few words, nothing of consequence. Miss Marple noted how quickly he dismissed the conversation. He was avoiding something. As the questioning continued, Miss Marple slipped away. She had no authority to conduct formal interviews, but she had a method all her own, and she knew exactly who to approach next. She found herself outside the butler's quarters, where Mr. Graves was tidying up after the morning's commotion. A man in service often saw things that others did not. Busy morning, Mr. Graves, Miss Marple said kindly. Graves straightened. That it is, ma'am. Miss Marple lowered her voice. Tell me, Did you see anyone near the back entrance last night? Graves hesitated. I can't say for certain, ma'am. But you suspect something, don't you? The butler exhaled, glancing around before lowering his voice. There was movement, that much I can say. A shadow near the side door. I didn't see who it was, but it wasn't Lady Eleanor. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. You're certain? Graves nodded. Too tall. A man, I think. But I didn't see his face. Miss Marple thanked him and made her way back to the house. A man near the side door. Victor had claimed he had taken a walk alone. Lord Bertram had retired early, but someone had been near the door at the time Eleanor disappeared. The question was, who? And more importantly, why? That evening, Miss Marple sat quietly in the drawing room as the house settled into an uneasy silence. The puzzle pieces were beginning to take shape. Eleanor had no intention of running away, yet she had vanished. Victor had hesitated when asked about his whereabouts. Harriet did not trust him, and she knew more than she was saying. Lord Bertram had been strangely dismissive about his last conversation with Eleanor. Someone told had been seen near the back door. After Eleanor had disappeared, Miss Marple sipped her tea thoughtfully. The truth was buried beneath these half-truths and omissions. It only needed a careful hand to unearth it. As she set her cup down, the door creaked open. Harriet stood there, looking pale. I need to speak with you, Miss Marple, she said quietly. Miss Marple gestured for her to sit. Harriet hesitated. Before lowering herself into the chair opposite, she clasped her hands together, knuckles white. There's something you need to know. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, waiting. Harriet took a deep breath. Eleanor was planning to leave, but not the way everyone thinks. Miss Marple's eyes darkened. Go on. Harriet hesitated, then whispered. She was afraid. She told me. She didn't think she would survive the night. Miss Marple's breath stilled. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, as if the house itself was listening. Chapter 4. A whispered warning. Miss Marple set down her teacup with the utmost care. The weight of Harriet's words lingered in the air, thick with meaning. She didn't think she would survive the night, Miss Marple repeated softly. Harriet nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She told me that night just before she went to her room that she had a terrible feeling. She said something wasn't right. Miss Marple's sharp eyes flickered with thought. Did she say what she was afraid of? Harriet hesitated. No, but she was trembling. I told her she should leave if she was so frightened. And her response, Harriet's throat tightened. She said, it's too late now. A faint breeze whispered through the half-open window. Outside, the estate grounds stretched into the distance, the morning mist still hanging low. Somewhere out there, Eleanor had vanished. Miss Marple leaned forward. My dear, why did you not mention this before? Harriet looked away. I was afraid. If Eleanor truly has come to harm, then saying the wrong thing. I quite understand, Miss Marple said kindly. But you must understand, Harriet, that withholding information now does not help Eleanor. Harriet swallowed. I know. Miss Marple tapped her fingers lightly against the arm of her chair. Tell me, my dear, did Eleanor mention Victor? Harriet hesitated just a moment too long. Harriet, Miss Marple said gently, if you know something, you must tell me. A long pause. Then, she was afraid of him, Harriet whispered. A hush fell between them, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock. Afraid, Miss Marple repeated, her voice measured, but she married him nonetheless. She felt trapped, Harriet said bitterly. The Langley name comes with expectations. She wasn't marrying Victor out of love, she was doing what was required of her. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. She had suspected as much. And did Victor know of her fears? Harriet's fingers curled around the hem of her sleeve. If he did, he never showed it. But I don't trust him, Miss Marple. I never have. Miss Marple sat back. A woman who fears her husband does not simply disappear on her wedding night, without reason. Someone wanted Eleanor gone. And if Harriet was right, if Eleanor had truly feared for her life, then she had never intended to stay in that house past her wedding night. The house remained in a state of unease. The Langley servants whispered among themselves. The guests had all departed, save for the close family members and those directly involved in the investigation. Lord Bertram had retired to his study. Inspector Wycliffe continued his inquiries, and Victor had retreated into cold silence. Miss Marple, however, had no intention of letting things settle. A woman was missing. That was not a matter to be ignored. She found herself wandering the halls, her eyes drifting over the household as they moved about their day. The butler, Mr. Graves, was polishing the silverware in the dining hall. The housekeeper, Mrs. Thorpe, was directing the maids with stiff efficiency. Everything seemed normal. And yet, it wasn't. Something was being left unsaid. Miss Marple's steps led her to Eleanor's room once more. The bridal suite remained untouched, save for the dust beginning to settle on the unused bed. The jewelry box on the dresser remained closed. The window was half open, the curtains barely stirring. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room. A missing bride should leave behind some indication of hurried departure, clothes taken, jewelry missing, a note, something. But everything remained precisely as it had been. Except she paused, her gaze falling on the edge of the dressing table. A faint smudge. Carefully, Miss Marple moved closer. A fingerprint, half wiped away. But more importantly, a trace of something else, powder. She reached out, dabbing the tip of her finger against the faint residue. Not ordinary face powder. This was something finer, lighter, sleeping powder. Miss Marple's mind whirled. If Eleanor had been given something to make her drowsy, perhaps, in a drink, she might not have left the room at all, which meant she had been taken, and someone in that house knew exactly what had happened. Miss Marple took a quiet seat in the drawing room just as Inspector Wycliffe entered, his expression one of tired impatience. "No one seems to know a thing," he muttered. "If I had £1 for every time someone told me they saw nothing unusual, I'd be a rich man." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "People often see more than they realize, Inspector. They simply don't know what they're looking at." Wycliffe grunted. "And what, pray, do you think we're looking at?" Miss Marple folded her hands in her lap. "We're looking at a woman who was afraid. A woman who vanished under circumstances that suggest she did not go willingly. A woman, I suspect, who was not even conscious when she left this house." Wycliffe frowned. "You think she was drugged?" "I think," Miss Marple said gently, "that someone wanted to ensure Eleanor did not fight back." Wycliffe sat heavily in the chair opposite her. "If that's true, then we're not looking at a runaway bride. We're looking at an abduction." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, Inspector, and possibly worse." The room fell silent. Wycliffe sighed. "We've questioned everyone, but there's little proof of anything." "Proof," Miss Marple murmured, "has a way of revealing itself." At that moment, the door opened abruptly. It was Lord Bertram, his face ashen. "You'd better come with me," he said, his voice oddly hoarse. "They've found something." Miss Marple rose at once, as did the inspector. "What is it?" Wycliffe demanded. Lord Bertram hesitated before speaking. "One of the groundsmen found something in the lake." Miss Marple's breath stilled. "Something or someone?" Lord Bertram swallowed. "A veil," he said finally, "floating near the reeds." Miss Marple exchanged a look with Wycliffe. A bride's veil, drifting in the still waters of the estate's lake. The first true sign of Eleanor, and perhaps the first true sign that she was never meant to be found alive. Chapter 5. The veil, in the lake. Inspector Wycliffe, Miss Marple, and Lord Bertram hurried across the estate grounds toward the lake, the damp morning air carrying a chilling weight. The path was slick from the previous night's rain, and though the sky was clear, an eerie stillness hung over the water. Near the lake's edge, a cluster of estate workers stood murmuring amongst themselves, their faces pale. One of them, a young gardener named Thomas, stepped forward hesitantly, pointing to a spot near the reeds. "There, sir, that's where I saw it," he said, his voice hushed. A delicate white veil, half submerged in the shallow water, clung to the reeds as though caught in a ghostly embrace. The fabric was sodden, its once pristine lace dirtied by the murky water. Wycliffe crouched down and carefully retrieved it, the material dripping as he held it up for all to see. A few gasps escaped from the gathered staff. Miss Marple, standing just behind the inspector, observed quietly. A bride's veil, lost in the night, now found floating in the lake. It told a story, but was it the right one? Wycliffe turned sharply to Thomas. "When did you find this?" "This morning, sir. I come down here early most days, and I saw it caught in the reeds." "Did you see anything else?" Thomas shook his head. "No, sir." Miss Marple glanced at Lord Bertram, whose face was unusually drawn. His hands were clasped behind his back, but she noticed his fingers twitch slightly. He was unsettled. "Inspector," she said gently, "if the veil was here, it suggests Eleanor did come this way or was brought here." Wycliffe nodded. "Aye, but the question is, where is she now?" Back at the house, the atmosphere was tense. The discovery of the veil had deepened the sense of unease. Lady Eleanor was no longer simply missing. Her fate was beginning to take a darker turn. Victor Langley sat stiffly in the drawing room, his face impassive. When Wycliffe placed the veil before him, he merely stared at it, his expression unreadable. "Is this your wife's?" Wycliffe asked. Victor exhaled slowly. "Yes. And yet, she was not wearing it when she left the reception," Miss Marple pointed out. Victor's gaze flickered toward her. "No, she took it off before retiring for the night." "Then how did it end up in the lake?" Victor's jaw tightened. "How should I know?" Miss Marple tilted her head. "That is precisely what we're trying to determine, Mr. Langley." Harriet Redfern sat across the room, her arms folded. She had not spoken much since their conversation the previous night, but Miss Marple could see the tension in her shoulders. It was Lord Bertram who finally spoke. "It means she did not leave willingly," he said, his voice rough. "She was taken." Wycliffe turned to him. "And do you have any idea by whom?" Lord Bertram hesitated, then shook his head. "No." Miss Marple watched him carefully. He was lying. He suspected something but was unwilling to say it. That afternoon, Miss Marple took a quiet walk through the estate gardens. There was something about the discovery of the veil that did not quite sit right with her. If Eleanor had been taken to the lake, why had no one seen or heard anything? The veil itself told a strange tale. A woman being dragged against her will would not have lost only her veil. There would have been torn fabric, a broken shoe, something more, but all they had was the veil, floating so conveniently in the reeds, a deliberate clue or a misdirection. Miss Marple paused near the garden gate. A lone figure stood beyond it, half hidden by the hedgerows. Mr. Graves. The butler had been with the family for years, a fixture of quiet efficiency, and yet Miss Marple had noticed the way his eyes darted toward Victor Langley whenever questions were asked, the way his hands remained tightly clasped, as if holding back some unspoken truth. She approached gently. "A quiet moment, Mr. Graves." He startled slightly before offering a small bow. "Miss Marple." She observed him for a moment. "You must know this house better than anyone. Tell me, is there a way out that one might use without being seen?" The butler's face remained impassive. "There are the main doors, of course, the servants' entrance at the rear, and a small side gate leading toward the woods." "The side gate," Miss Marple murmured. "Is it often used?" "Rarely," Graves admitted, "but it is not locked." Miss Marple's mind whirred. If someone had taken Eleanor that night, they would not have risked the main doors. The side gate provided a discreet exit. She met the butler's gaze. "Mr. Graves, I must ask on. The night Lady Eleanor disappeared, did you see anyone near that gate?" A pause. "Then I did." Miss Marple's breath stilled. Graves hesitated. "I was closing the house for the night when I saw movement, a man, slipping through the side gate." "Who?" The butler's throat worked. "I cannot say for certain." Miss Marple's sharp eyes narrowed. "Cannot or will not." Graves swallowed. "Miss Marple, I have served this family for many years. There are loyalties to consider." Miss Marple smiled kindly. "Loyalty, my dear Mr. Graves, should never stand in the way of the truth." The butler hesitated. Then, softly, "It was Lord Bertram." Miss Marple returned to the house, her mind racing. Lord Bertram, the man who had dismissed his last conversation with Eleanor as nothing of consequence, the man who had seemed particularly troubled at the discovery of the veil. And now, the man who had been seen slipping through the side gate on the night Eleanor vanished. She found Wycliffe in the study, sifting through notes. He looked up as she entered. "What now, Miss Marple?" "I believe," she said calmly, "we must speak to Lord Bertram." Wycliffe raised a brow. "Oh, and why's that?" Miss Marple met his gaze. "Because he was seen leaving through the side gate on the night of Eleanor's disappearance." A heavy silence. Then Wycliffe stood. "Well, that changes things." They found Lord Bertram in his study, standing by the window, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. When he saw them enter, his face darkened. "What is it now?" Wycliffe stepped forward. "Lord Bertram, can you explain why you were seen leaving through the side gate on the night of your niece's disappearance?" The glass stilled in his hand. A long pause. Then, "That is none of your concern." "I rather think it is," Wycliffe said coldly, "unless you'd like to explain what you were doing out there." Lord Bertram exhaled sharply. He set the glass down and turned to face them. For a moment, Miss Marple thought he might deny it outright. But then, "I was looking for her." Silence. Wycliffe frowned. "You were looking for Eleanor." Lord Bertram nodded. "She came to me that evening, said she was frightened. She wanted to leave." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "And what did you tell her?" Lord Bertram's voice was tight. Miss Marple's heart quickened. And what did you tell her? Lord Bertram's voice was tight. That she was a Langley, and Langleys do not run. Miss Marple's stomach turned, and when she disappeared, his hands clenched. I went after her. I thought I might find her near the gate, but she was already gone. Miss Marple's breath slowed. Eleanor had run, but someone had caught up with her first. Chapter 6. The shadow of the past. A thick silence settled in Lord Bertram's study. The dim afternoon light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk. Lord Bertram stood stiffly by the fireplace, his fingers twitching against the edge of his glass. Inspector Wycliffe narrowed his eyes. So you admit it? You knew Eleanor was planning to leave? Lord Bertram exhaled sharply. Yes, she came to me that night, asking for help. I refused her. Miss Marple's gaze softened. Why, Lord Bertram? His lips pressed into a thin line. Because running away from duty is not how a Langley behaves. Duty? Wycliffe scoffed. You mean an arranged marriage she wanted no part of? Bertram's jaw clenched, but he did not respond. Miss Marple stepped forward. My dear Lord Bertram, I must ask, when you followed her to the side gate, was she alone? The older man hesitated. His eyes flickered toward the door, as if weighing his next words. I never found her, he admitted at last. By the time I reached the gate, she was gone. Miss Marple studied him carefully. There was truth in his words, but not the whole truth. And yet, she said gently, you said nothing of this before. Bertram's hand tightened around his glass. Because I knew what it would look like. I am the head of this family. If I admitted to knowing she wished to leave, suspicion would fall upon me. And yet he sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. I did not believe she would truly vanish. I thought she had simply fled, and in time, we would find her. Miss Marple exchanged a look with Wycliffe. If Lord Bertram was telling the truth, then Eleanor had left the house of her own accord, but someone had intercepted her before she reached safety. The question was, who? Later that afternoon, Miss Marple sat in the parlor, knitting quietly as she listened to the murmured conversations of the household. The tension was thick. Whispers of scandal floated through the air like a distant storm. Victor Langley had shut himself away in his study. Harriet Redfern, pale and anxious, kept to herself in the conservatory. The servants moved about, with wary glances, their usual efficiency faltering under the weight of uncertainty. And then there was Mr. Graves. Miss Marple had watched the butler for some time now. He was a man of habit, precise in his movements, loyal to the family. But today, she noted something different, a slight hesitation in his step. A glance, too carefully masked. He knew something. She set down her knitting, and rose, following him, discreetly as he moved toward the servants' quarters. Mr. Graves, she called gently. The butler stopped abruptly, his posture stiffening. He turned slowly. Yes, Miss Marple. She smiled kindly. I wonder if I might trouble you for a word. Graves hesitated. Then, with a nod, he gestured toward a quiet alcove. Miss Marple lowered her voice. You have served this family faithfully for many years, have you not? Yes, madame. And yet, I cannot help but feel that there is something troubling you. Graves' expression remained neutral. It is a troubling time for us all, Miss Marple. Indeed, she agreed. But I suspect that your concern runs deeper than most. The butler's throat bobbed. His hands, usually so steady, twitched slightly. Miss Marple leaned in. Mr. Graves, you saw something that night, did you not? For the first time, his composure cracked, his mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He exhaled. I do not wish to cause unnecessary trouble. Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. Mr. Graves, a young woman's life is at stake. If you know something, now is the time to speak. A long pause. Then I heard voices, he admitted at last. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Where? Near the gate. It was late, after most of the household had retired. He hesitated, as if weighing his next words. One voice belonged to Lady Eleanor. Miss Marple waited. And the other? Graves' face darkened. Mr. Victor. A hush fell between them. Miss Marple's fingers tightened around the fabric of her skirt. Victor Langley, the groom who had barely reacted to his wife's disappearance, the man Eleanor had feared, the man who had everything to lose if she left. Miss Marple wasted no time. She found Wycliffe in the drawing room, and relayed what she had learned. The inspector's expression darkened. So Victor was the last to see her. It would appear so, Miss Marple said. Wycliffe rose swiftly. Then, it's time we had a word with him. They found Victor in his study, staring out of the window with a glass of brandy in his hand. He turned slowly as they entered, his expression cold. "What now?" he asked flatly. Wycliffe wasted no time. "You were seen with Eleanor at the gate on the night of her disappearance." Victor's grip on the glass tightened. "Who told you that?" "That is not the point," Wycliffe said sharply. "You told us you last saw Eleanor at the reception, but now we know that's not true. So tell me, Mr. Langley, what really happened that night?" Victor exhaled through his nose. "She came to me. She said she couldn't do it." "Do what?" Miss Marple asked softly. Victor's jaw worked. "Be my wife." A heavy silence followed. Miss Marple observed him carefully. There was anger in his voice, but also something else, something deeper. Wycliffe pressed on. "And what did you do?" Victor's eyes darkened. "I tried to reason with her. Told her she was being foolish, that she was ruining everything. She wouldn't listen." Miss Marple tilted her head, and then Victor's fingers twitched. "Then she ran." "Ran where?" Victor exhaled. "Toward the lake." Wycliffe straightened. "And you followed?" Victor hesitated. "No." Miss Marple's voice was quiet. "Are you certain?" Victor's hands curled into fists. "I was angry. I let her go." Wycliffe narrowed his eyes. "That's very convenient, Mr. Langley. A missing wife, a broken engagement, and all you have to say is that you let her go." Victor's face darkened. "Believe what you like." Miss Marple studied him. He was hiding something, but was it guilt or something else? Wycliffe turned to her. "What do you think, Miss Marple?" She tapped a finger against her chin. "I think, Inspector, that Mr. Langley is not telling us everything." Victor let out a low laugh. "And why should I? You've already decided I'm guilty." Miss Marple shook her head. "Not guilty, Mr. Langley, but complicit." Victor's jaw tightened. Wycliffe's voice was firm. "Mr. Langley, until we find Eleanor, you are the prime suspect." Victor set down his glass with a sharp clink. "Then I suggest you find her, Inspector." Miss Marple met his gaze steadily. "Oh, we will, Mr. Langley." And deep in her heart, she feared they would not like what they found. Chapter 7. The truth in the ashes. Atmosphere in Langley Hall had shifted. Shadows clung to the corners of every room, not from the fading daylight but from the weight of unspoken truths pressing down upon the household. The discovery of Eleanor's veil had unsettled everyone, and now, the revelation that Victor had last seen her near the gate had cast suspicion over him like a storm cloud. Miss Marple sat in the morning room, her knitting resting untouched in her lap. A puzzle was forming in her mind, and with every new piece, the image became clearer but not yet complete. She glanced toward the fireplace. The embers were cold now, but last night, the flames had crackled merrily. Miss Marple had noticed Victor sitting alone by the hearth, staring into the fire, lost in thought. It was an odd sight. There was something about a man watching a fire that suggested he wished to see something destroyed. A thought stirred in her mind. Rising, she made her way toward the study, where Inspector Wycliffe was deep in thought, sifting through his notes. He looked up as she entered. "More theories, Miss Marple?" he asked, dryly. She smiled. "An observation, Inspector? You see, I was just thinking about last night about Mr. Langley and the fireplace." Wycliffe frowned. "What about it?" Miss Marple clasped her hands. "A man only watches a fire so intently when he has something to burn." The inspector's expression darkened. "You think he destroyed evidence?" Miss Marple gave a small nod. "It would not surprise me." Without another word, Wycliffe called for one of the servants and had them bring a poker. Together, they stirred through the cold ashes in the study's grand fireplace. It was not long before Miss Marple's suspicions were confirmed. Amid the gray remains, something blackened and brittle crumbled under Wycliffe's touch. He lifted it carefully with a gloved hand, revealing charred fragments of paper and fabric. Miss Marple leaned in. Though much of it had been destroyed, she could make out the faint outline of embroidery on the burnt material. Lace. A wedding gown. Wycliffe. Single quotes as face turned grim. "So he did burn something." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "And we must ask why." Victor Langley sat in the drawing room, his expression a mask of indifference. When Wycliffe placed the charred remains before him, his only reaction was a slight tightening of his jaw. "I assume you have an explanation," the inspector said coolly. Victor's eyes flickered toward the remains. Then, with a slow breath, he leaned back in his chair. "It was Eleanor's dress. Why burn it?" Victor exhaled through his nose. "Because I was angry. She left me humiliated, ran away like a coward." It was an act of destruction, nothing more. Miss Marple studied him. His voice was carefully measured, but there was something in his eyes, something restless. "And you did this last night?" she asked. Victor hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, convenient," Wycliffe muttered. "Just after we discovered her veil." Victor's eyes darkened. "Believe what you will. I burned it because I no longer wanted a reminder of her betrayal." Miss Marple spoke gently. "And yet, Mr. Langley, one does not burn a wedding gown for mere anger. One does so to erase something." Victor's gaze snapped to hers. "What are you implying?" Miss Marple's expression remained mild. "I am simply saying that people do not always destroy things because they despise them. Sometimes they destroy them to hide the truth." Victor's hand twitched against the armrest. Before he could respond, the drawing-room door creaked open. Harriet Redfern stood in the doorway, her face pale. She faltered. "I need to speak with Miss Marple." In the privacy of the conservatory, Harriet clutched her hands together, as if gathering her courage. "I haven't been entirely honest," she admitted softly. Miss Marple smiled kindly. "I rather thought not, my dear." Harriet swallowed. "That night, after the reception, Eleanor came to me." Miss Marple's breath slowed. "Go on." Harriet's voice was barely above a whisper. "She said she was afraid, that she had to leave before it was too late." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Too late for what?" Harriet hesitated. Then, finally, she was afraid of Victor. A hush settled over the conservatory. Miss Marple's voice was soft. "Did she say why?" Harriet's eyes glistened. "No, only that she had discovered something that made her realize she could never marry him." Miss Marple's mind whirred. If Eleanor had uncovered something about Victor, then it was not simply a case of a reluctant bride. She had a reason to fear him, a real reason. She met Harriet's gaze. "Did she tell you where she intended to go?" Harriet bit her lip. "She mentioned the lake." Miss Marple inhaled sharply. "The lake," Harriet nodded. "She said had hidden something there, something important." Evening was beginning to settle as Miss Marple and Wycliffe made their way back to the lake. The water was still, the reeds swaying gently in the breeze. "If she hid something here, we need to find it," Wycliffe muttered. Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned the shoreline. Then, something caught her attention. A single stone near the water's edge had been moved. It was slightly askew, as if it had been lifted and hastily placed back. She pointed there. With careful hands, Wycliffe lifted the stone. Beneath it, half buried in the damp earth, was a small metal box. Wycliffe pried it open. Inside, wrapped in a delicate silk handkerchief, was a stack of letters. Miss Marple's breath caught. She picked up the first letter and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the words sent a chill through her. "My dearest Eleanor, you must believe me. Never meant for you to find out this way, but you deserve the truth. Victor is not the man he pretends to be." Miss Marple's hands trembled slightly as she read on. The letters told a story, a dark one. Victor Langley had secrets, and Eleanor had found them. That was why she ran, and that was why someone had stopped her. Miss Marple's voice was quiet but firm. "Inspector, I believe we now know what Eleanor was so afraid of." Wycliffe's gaze hardened. "Then it's time we confront Victor Langley with the truth." The halls of Langley Manor were silent as they entered, but as they made their way toward Victor's study, a loud crash echoed from inside. Wycliffe's hand went to his revolver. He pushed open the door. Victor was gone. The windows stood open, curtains billowing in the evening air. Wycliffe cursed. "He's running." Miss Marple exhaled. She had suspected Victor was guilty of something, but now his actions confirmed it. A guilty man ran, and Victor Langley had just fled. Miss Marple turned to Wycliffe, her voice calm despite the storm rising in her chest. "I believe, Inspector," she said, "that we must find him before he disappears for good." Chapter 8. The pursuit of truth. Air inside Langley Manor crackled with tension. Miss Marple stood beside Inspector Wycliffe in Victor Langley's empty study, her sharp eyes scanning the room. The open window swayed slightly in the night breeze, its velvet curtains billowing like ghosts in the dim light. Victor had fled, and flight, Miss Marple knew, was the act of a guilty man. Wycliffe muttered a curse under his breath and turned sharply. "Search the grounds, now," he barked at the constables. "He can't have gotten far." The men scattered at once, their hurried footsteps echoing through the manor. Miss Marple, however, remained still. She had learned, long ago, that haste was often the enemy of wisdom. Instead, She turned to Harriet Redfern, who stood pale and shaken in the doorway. "Miss Redfern," she said gently, "when Eleanor spoke to you that night, she mentioned that she had hidden something at the lake. Did she say anything about confronting Victor first?" Harriet hesitated, her fingers twisting nervously together. She said she had confronted him earlier that evening, before the wedding, but she didn't tell me what he said, only that she was more afraid than ever. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. Victor had known Eleanor was planning to leave. He had tried to stop her, and now he had vanished. Wycliffe, impatient, turned back to them. "We need to check his room." Upstairs, Victor's bedroom was as impeccably kept as the rest of Langley Manor, but the signs of his hurried departure were clear. A wardrobe door stood half open, a few drawers had been pulled out, and the faint scent of burning lingered in the air. Miss Marple's sharp eyes moved to the fireplace. The ashes inside were still warm. She approached carefully, using the poker to stir through the remains. Within moments, she uncovered what Victor had tried to destroy, a half-burned envelope, its edges blackened by fire. With delicate fingers, she retrieved what was left of its contents. A letter, partially burned but still legible in places. She read aloud, "Have proof of what you did in London. If you do not let me go, I will tell them everything. I mean it, Victor. The truth will." The rest was lost to the flames. Miss Marple straightened, her mind worry. "London," she murmured. Wycliffe leaned over her shoulder, reading the remaining words with a deepening frown. Whatever Eleanor discovered, it was tied to Victor's past. Something he wanted no one to know. Miss Marple turned to him. "Inspector, you must investigate Victor's dealings in London. Whatever he was hiding, Eleanor discovered and it was enough to make her risk everything to escape." Wycliffe nodded grimly. "I'll send word to Scotland Yard." But before he could say more, a constable burst into the room, breathless. "Sir, we found him." Victor Langley had not made it far. The constables had caught him just beyond the manor grounds, stumbling toward the woods. His clothes were disheveled, his face damp with sweat, and in his hand, he clutched a small leather case. Wycliffe strode toward him, fury blazing in his eyes. "Going somewhere, were you, Mr. Langley?" Victor's jaw was set. "You're making a mistake," Wycliffe snorted. "Am I? Running makes you look guilty, you know." Victor's hands curled into fists. "Guilty of what?" Miss Marple's voice was quiet but firm. "Of knowing exactly what happened to Eleanor." Victor's breath hitched. Wycliffe wasted no time. "Search his case." One of the constables obeyed, snapping the case open. Inside were a few hastily packed belongings and, at the very bottom, an envelope stuffed with cash. Miss Marple noted Victor's expression as Wycliffe pulled the money free. It was not the expression of a man's surprise, but of a man caught. Wycliffe narrowed his eyes. "Running away, with a stash of money. You know, Victor, it looks an awful lot like you were planning never to return." Victor's lips curled. "Maybe I wasn't." Miss Marple studied him closely. "And yet, Mr. Langley, if you were truly innocent, why flee?" Victor's gaze flickered. "Because no one will believe me otherwise." Wycliffe scoffed. "That's what guilty men always say." Victor exhaled through his nose. "You think I killed her?" Wycliffe crossed his arms. "You tell me." For a long moment, Victor said nothing. Then, at last, his shoulders slumped. "Didn't kill Eleanor." His voice was quieter now. "But I did try to stop her from leaving." Miss Marple's hands folded before her. "What happened at the lake, Mr. Langley?" Victor swallowed. "She was already afraid when she got there. She kept saying that she had proof of something, that she was going to ruin me if I didn't let her go." Miss Marple's breath slowed. Wycliffe pressed, and Victor exhaled. "I was furious. I told her that she was being ridiculous, that she had no idea what she was doing." His voice dropped lower. "And then she ran. I followed her, but I lost her in the trees. That was the last time I saw her." Silence. Miss Marple's keen mind worked through his words. There was truth in them, though perhaps not the whole truth. She turned to Wycliffe. "Inspector, I believe we must return to the lake." Victor's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Miss Marple's voice was calm. "Because, Mr. Langley, I believe the answer to this mystery lies there, and I fear that what we will find may finally reveal the truth." Victor paled slightly, and deep in her heart, Miss Marple knew they were very close now. Very close indeed. Chapter 9. Secrets. Beneath the watered night air was crisp as Miss Marple, Inspector Wycliffe, and a group of constables made their way back to the lake. The still water reflected the moonlight, casting ghostly ripples across its surface. Somewhere nearby, an owl hooted, its mournful call adding to the eerie silence. Miss Marple walked slowly, her mind sharp with thought. Eleanor had hidden something at the lake. She had been afraid, and Victor had been the last to see her alive. But was he the killer? She wasn't convinced, not yet. Victor Langley, still under guard, trailed behind them. His face was set in a tense expression, his usual arrogance subdued. When they reached the shoreline, Wycliffe turned to the constables. "Search the water. If Eleanor hid something here, we need to find it." The men waded into the shallows with lanterns, their boots stirring up silt and reeds as they swept the lake bed. Miss Marple, meanwhile, observed the surroundings with keen eyes. The trees loomed dark and watchful, their branches shifting in the wind. Somewhere nearby, Eleanor had vanished, and she had left behind more than just a wedding veil. Victor's voice broke the silence. "I already told you she ran from me, but I didn't touch her." Miss Marple turned to him, studying his face. "And yet, Mr. Langley, you burned her dress, you fled. These are not the actions of an innocent man." Victor's jaw tightened. "I was desperate. But I did not kill her." Wycliffe scoffed but said nothing. "Then, sir," one of the constables shouted from the shallows. They had found something. A small, dark object had surfaced in the water, tangled in the reeds. A box. The constables brought the waterlogged box to the shore. It was rusted at the edges, its lock weakened by time and moisture. Wycliffe pried it open with a knife. Inside, wrapped in a soaked cloth, were papers. Miss Marple leaned forward as Wycliffe carefully unfolded the documents. Despite the water damage, the ink was still legible. A hush fell over the group as they read the words. It was a marriage certificate for Victor Langley and another woman. Wycliffe muttered a curse. He was already married. Victor went deathly pale. "That's a lie." Miss Marple, however, was not surprised. She had suspected there was more to Victor's past than he had admitted. She lifted another document from the box. A legal notice. It confirmed the truth. Victor had been secretly married in London years ago, and the woman had later disappeared. Miss Marple turned to him. "Eleanor found these, didn't she?" Victor swallowed hard. "Aye, she confronted you on the night of the wedding," Miss Marple continued, her voice steady. "She told you she had proof. She threatened to expose you." Victor's breathing was uneven. "I didn't kill her," he whispered. Wycliffe's eyes burned with suspicion. "Then, where is she?" Victor's lips parted but no words came. Miss Marple studied him, then sighed. "Inspector," she said quietly, "I do not believe Victor Langley killed Eleanor." Wycliffe shot her a sharp look. "How can you be sure?" Miss Marple's gaze swept over the lake, the trees, the cold, damp earth beneath her feet. "Because," she murmured, "I do not think Eleanor is dead at all." A stunned silence followed her words. Wycliffe frowned. "What do you mean?" Miss Marple clasped her hands. "Consider it carefully, Inspector. We have no body. We have no true evidence of murder, only the assumption that Eleanor disappeared under foul play." Wycliffe hesitated, but the veil was left deliberately. Miss Marple finished, as if she wanted us to believe she had met with misfortune. Victor blinked. "She staged her disappearance." Miss Marple nodded. "And what better way to do so than by making it look like you had reason to harm her?" Wycliffe rubbed his chin. "But why?" Miss Marple glanced at the marriage certificate. Perhaps Eleanor realized she could not simply leave quietly. If she ran away, Victor could find her. He could ruin her reputation. She needed something stronger. A scandal. Victor exhaled, his expression unreadable. "So she set me up." Miss Marple gave a small smile. "Clever girl." Wycliffe let out a low chuckle. "Well, if she's alive, we'll find her." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Oh, I believe she will find us. Because if Eleanor had gone to such lengths to disappear, then she had a plan. And soon, the truth would come to light." Chapter 10. The Bride's Secret. Returned tension in Langley Manor was almost palpable as the clock struck midnight. Miss Marple sat in the drawing room, knitting in her lap, though her mind was far from the rhythmic movement of the needles. Inspector Wycliffe stood near the fireplace, his arms crossed as he watched Victor Langley with unrelenting suspicion. The disgraced groom had been forced to remain in the manor under police watch, though no formal charges had yet been placed upon him. It had been hours since the discovery of the hidden documents at the Lake. Victor's secret marriage, the legal notices, all the evidence that had set Eleanor on the path to escape. And yet, despite the revelations, the most pressing question remained: where was Eleanor? Miss Marple had faith that an answer was near. The pieces were falling into place, and if her instincts were correct, the final move in this carefully laid game was fast approaching. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. One of the constables answered, and in the next moment, the room fell into stunned silence. There, standing in the dim glow of the hallway lamp, was Eleanor Langley. Or rather, Eleanor Redfern, the woman who had disappeared on her wedding night. Eleanor's appearance was striking. Her wedding gown was gone, replaced by a simple traveling coat, its hem damp from the night air. Her auburn hair, usually so carefully styled, was slightly disheveled, but what was most noticeable was the way she held herself, not as a frightened woman in distress, but as someone who had made a bold choice and was now ready to face the consequences. Victor Langley shot to his feet. Eleanor's expression hardened as she looked at her former. "I would prefer if you did not speak my name, Mr. Langley." Miss Marple felt a small smile touch her lips. Ah, she thought, so that is how it is to be. Inspector Wycliffe recovered from his shock and stepped forward. "Mrs. Langley." "I'm not Mrs. Langley," Eleanor interrupted, her voice clear and firm, "and I never was." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Victor's face darkened. "You left me humiliated, Eleanor. My name has been dragged through scandal. Because of you." Eleanor turned her gaze on him with an almost unnerving calm. "A scandal, Mr. Langley? You mean the kind of scandal that follows a man who marries a woman in secret and then makes her disappear?" Victor's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you mean." Eleanor let out a quiet laugh. "Oh, but you do." She turned to Inspector Wycliffe. "I assume you have seen the documents I left behind." Wycliffe nodded. "We have. Would you care to explain why you went to such lengths to disappear?" Eleanor exhaled slowly, then took a seat. "I knew the truth about Victor. I knew that he had been married before, and that his first wife had vanished. I knew that if I tried to leave him, he would do everything in his power to ruin me, so I had to be smarter." Victor scoffed. "You think this makes you clever?" Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "It makes me alive." Miss Marple watched as Victor clenched his fists. The man was angry, certainly, but there was something else beneath it. Frustration, not at Eleanor's words, but at the fact that she had outmaneuvered him completely. Inspector Wycliffe leaned forward. "Miss Redfern, I must ask plainly, do you have proof that Victor Langley was responsible for his first wife's disappearance?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "Not enough for a court, perhaps, but I have the truth, and I know how he operates. He chooses women with no strong family ties, women who won't be missed if they suddenly vanish." Victor's lips curled. "You're slandering me, Eleanor." She ignored him. "I needed to make sure that when I left, people noticed, that they suspected you. I needed you to be so caught up in proving your innocence that you wouldn't have the time or resources to come after me." Miss Marple gave a small nod. "And so you vanished into the night, leaving behind just enough mystery to keep the world guessing." Eleanor's eyes softened as she turned to Miss Marple. "I knew that someone like you would figure it out." The elderly sleuth chuckled. "Well, my dear, you did leave quite a trail. One only had to see it for what it was." Wycliffe folded his arms. "And where have you been all this time?" Eleanor hesitated. "I had help." Harriet Redfern stepped into the room. "She was with me." A ripple of surprise went through the room once more. Harriet continued. "After she left the lake, Eleanor came to me. We had planned this together. In case she needed to escape, I hid her at my cottage for a few days. And when we saw the way Victor was behaving, the way he was burning things, preparing to run, we knew it was time for Eleanor to return." Inspector Wycliffe turned back to Eleanor. "And what do you expect to happen now?" Eleanor straightened. "I expect to be free of Victor Langley. I expect the world to know what kind of man he is." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. "And yet, my dear, there remains the question of what truly happened to his first wife." A silence settled over the room. Victor's mouth opened, then closed. And in that moment, Miss Marple saw it, the flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow of guilt. "Inspector," Miss Marple said softly, "I believe it would be most useful to investigate not just Victor's marriage records but also any reports of missing women in London." Wycliffe nodded. "I'll see to it." He turned to Victor, whose silence spoke volumes. "And in the meantime, Mr. Langley, I think we'll be having a very long conversation." Victor's shoulders sank. He had lost. Miss Marple turned to Eleanor. "You were brave, my dear." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I only did what I had to." Miss Marple reached for her teacup, taking a sip. "As do we all, my dear, as do we all." Chapter 11. The vanishing wife. At atmosphere in Langley Manor was thick with tension. Eleanor had returned, her secret revealed, and Victor Langley sat in silence, his carefully maintained mask beginning to crumble. Inspector Wycliffe wasted no time. He ordered a full investigation into Victor's past, particularly concerning the mysterious disappearance of his first wife. Miss Marple sat with quiet patience, observing Victor's every movement. The man, who had once carried himself with arrogance, now looked like a trapped animal. "Mr. Langley," Wycliffe said firmly, "we've uncovered proof that you were married before. What happened to your first wife?" Victor's eyes flickered toward Eleanor, then back to the inspector. "She left me." Miss Marple clicked her tongue. "And yet, Mr. Langley, no record of her departure exists. No family ever reported her safe. No evidence that she ever started a new life elsewhere." She tilted her head. "Now, isn't that strange?" Victor clenched his jaw. "It was none of your concern then, and it is none of your concern now." Whip stepped forward. "That is where you are mistaken. You see, I sent word to my colleagues in London. They're looking into old missing persons reports. If your wife simply left, we'll find proof of it." He leaned in. "But if she never left at all, well, that's a different matter." For the first time, Victor seemed genuinely unsettled. His hand twitched against the armrest of his chair. Eleanor, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke. "She's dead, isn't she?" All eyes turned to her. Victor's nostrils flared. "You don't know what you're talking about." Eleanor stood. "I do, and I know you, Victor. You don't let women leave. You control them. You own them. And when they try to escape," she exhaled sharply, "they disappear." Miss Marple, still calm, tapped her fingers together. "Yes, I have been thinking the same, my dear." She turned back to Victor. "If we were to search your family estate in London, I wonder what might we find?" Victor shot to his feet. "You have no right to." The door burst open. A constable rushed inside, a telegram in hand. "Inspector, a response from London." Wycliffe took the telegram and scanned the contents. His face hardened. Miss Marple waited. Finally, Wycliffe folded the paper. Victor Langley's first wife, Marianne Langley, was reported missing 6 years ago. Her family filed a case, but it was dismissed due to lack of evidence. Eleanor paled, and Wycliffe's voice was grim. "And they never heard from her again." A heavy silence followed. Miss Marple took a steady breath. 6 years is a long time. A woman does not simply vanish without a trace unless someone ensures she does. Victor scoffed. "You're making wild assumptions." Wycliffe's patience wore thin. "We will be searching your estate, Langley." His voice was sharp as steel. "And I suspect we will find exactly what we need." Victor's composure cracked. "You have nothing on me?" Miss Marple gave a small smile. "Not yet. But the truth has a way of coming to light." Victor's hands balled into fists, but he said nothing. Wycliffe turned to his men. "We leave for London at first light." Miss Marple sipped her tea, already certain of what they would find. Chapter 12. A grave revelation. The time the sun rose. Langley Manor was no longer just a house filled with secrets. It was the center of an impending scandal. Inspector Wycliffe, determined as ever, had gathered his constables and made swift arrangements to travel to Victor Langley's London estate. Miss Marple, despite her age, was among those who accompanied them, for she knew that the final truth was waiting to be uncovered. The journey was made in tense silence, with Victor Langley sitting between two officers, his usual arrogance replaced by a grim, almost resigned expression. Eleanor Redfern, though shaken, held her head high. She was no longer a bride abandoned on her wedding night. She was a woman on the verge of justice. The London townhouse was an imposing structure of dark brick and iron railings, standing in a quiet, respectable street. But Miss Marple had seen enough in her lifetime to know that even the grandest homes could hide the darkest of sins. As the officers forced open the doors and stepped inside, the air itself seemed heavier, as though the house had been holding its breath for years. The search began immediately. Wycliffe's men moved through the rooms with methodical precision, opening drawers, pulling back rugs, tapping on the walls for hidden compartments. Victor Langley remained seated in the drawing room under watch, saying nothing. Miss Marple wandered through the corridors, her sharp eyes taking in every detail, the dust on certain surfaces, the faint scent of dampness that lingered. Despite the house being well kept, something was wrong here. It was in the basement that the discovery was made. One of the constables called out, his voice echoing off the cold stone walls. Wycliffe, hurried down the steps, Miss Marple following behind. There, in the dim light of a flickering lantern, lay the answer they had all been searching for. The floor had been disturbed. A patch of earth, hidden beneath a wooden panel, had been crudely covered. Miss Marple's breath caught. Wycliffe turned sharply to Langley. "Care to explain this?" Victor's expression did not change. The officers set to work, carefully digging away the soil. The scent of decay was faint but undeniable. And then a scrap of fabric emerged, a piece of a dress, old and discolored with time. And beneath it, the remains of a woman. Eleanor clapped a hand over her mouth. One of the constables muttered a quiet curse. Miss Marple, however, remained calm. She had known from the moment she saw the fear in Eleanor's eyes that Victor Langley was capable of such a thing. Wycliffe turned back to Langley. "Marianne Langley," he said grimly. "I suppose you'll tell us she chose to be buried here." Victor finally spoke. His voice was quiet, almost detached. "She betrayed me." A chill ran through the room. Miss Marple sighed. "And so you silenced her, just as you would have done to Eleanor." Victor's expression did not change. "She was mine. She belonged to me." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice shaking with fury. "She was never yours, and neither was I." For the first time, Victor Langley looked at her, really looked at her, and then, without another word, he lowered his head. It was over. By evening, Victor Langley had been arrested. The news spread quickly, turning the once respected gentleman into a monster in the eyes of society. Marianne Langley's remains were identified, and justice, though long delayed, was finally being served. Eleanor Redfern sat beside Miss Marple in a quiet London tea room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "I suppose I should thank you," Eleanor murmured. "Without you, he might have gotten away with it." Miss Marple gave a small smile. "Oh, my dear, the truth would have come out eventually. It always does." Eleanor sighed. "I spent so long being afraid of him. But now," she exhaled slowly, "now I am free." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Yes, my dear, you are." And with that, the mystery of the bride who disappeared on her wedding night had finally been solved. Thank you for tuning in to Mystery Unlocked. If you enjoyed the intrigue, suspense, and the thrill of the chase, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Stay updated on more captivating detective adventures that will keep you at the edge of your seat. Your support makes it possible to continue bringing these stories to life. Keep the mysteries alive until next time.